Peter, my name is Jerry Fialka. Today is August 27, 2021. We want to thank sincerely the great Clinton Ignatoff for hosting us, and he'll be back. Thank you, Clinton. And it's an honor and a pleasure to be here with Bernadette Bowen, better known as Bird. Thanks for coming, Bird.
Thank you for having me.
Where are you calling in from?
Well, right now I'm technically in Northwest Ohio. The way I usually describe it is, so I grew up in Northwest Indiana, like a half hour from Chicago. And if you basically copy and pasted where I lived on the map in Indiana and into Ohio, it's basically the same place.
Well, we like Ohio because it's got a high in the middle and an O on each end.
I haven't heard that one, but I love it.
So the first question is, what's the best thing for a human being?
Ooh. That's a really good question. I think it's hard for me not to divorce it from the present COVID context, right? So I think ultimately what's most important to human beings is being able to have basic necessities. And whether that's clean water and air and food and ability to access healthcare and have things that you need that allow you to feel a sense of belonging. I think that isn't one answer, but I don't think that there should be one answer.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate that. What's your favorite form of information, how it comes into you?
I think I'm more prone. So I'm a millennial, and I think because of being raised with the internet since I was like 7, I'm very attuned and like have a preference for text, which is weird, I think, actually, for my generation. Like, usually people my age are a bit more interested in like video content. Whereas I kind of avoid things like YouTube unless I actually have to. Like, I'm not the kind of millennial that's gonna like watch specific users or like follow specific creators a lot. I'm more fond of reading like people that whose ideas resonate with me. And that's why I think I can even succeed in academia at all, if you could say that I've succeeded in any sense, because like I just really love reading ideas and then being able to discuss them.
Yeah. So you're saying text meaning printed word?
I think so, yeah. Well, and it doesn't have to be printed necessarily, like, and that's where it's kind of that's what I think makes my work interesting too, like whether it's the work that I put out or the work that I have read and been influenced by, because I'm actually more fond of digital writing, and I think that is distinctly millennial about me, right? Like, because I like the ability to like post impulsively. Like, it makes me I don't know, there's something about it that's very appealing to me. And then even if it ends up being my own undoing a lot of the time, to be honest, because like I'll post something too quickly, and then like if on Twitter, for instance, I'll post something and then catch a typo later and then need to delete it and rewrite it and post it again. But I love the editing. Like, when it comes to my creative work, that's digital is definitely my thing. And I think that it is because I was raised like on AOL and AIM and like blog sites like Xanga. I don't know if you ever were on there.
I wasn't, but yeah, I understand what you're saying. Is another word for digital writing electronic word?
I think that it could be.
Yeah. Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
I love that question. So I'm trying to think what year it is. I feel like the last 2 or 3 years have just blended together since COVID. I wrote a paper about this device called the Love Box. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but basically it's a digital love note device. And I think that what I studied and found when I was looking at that paper kind of answers this question. So I asked what is the concept of love in a US context? Like, why would people be attracted to a device like this? And I think that the reason is because people want a visible, specifically, like in an immediate ecological way. Like, we are prone in the Western world to have visual biases. Like, we want to be able to see that something is real. And I think otherwise it's like our existence is so fleeting, and we like to just have a distance from that as much as possible. Like, I can't help but get existential with it, and I don't mean it to be like in a sad way. Like, it doesn't have to be in a sad way. I think it's actually a very beautiful thing. Wanting to be able to be reminded of our own humanness in a way that, like, many times we kind of shy away from.
Yeah, I think it was really well articulated. Thank you for saying that. And I'm curious because neuroscientists tend to say, I think, that visual is like 80%. It's way more dominant of our five senses. So who knows? Because once you start studying McLuhan, you get sense ratio shifting.
Sure.
And we'll get into it, but I want to finish the through line on this. Is the desire or need to collect information more innate or more invented?
Ooh, I don't think I took a philosophy of technology course in my last semester during spring 2020 of coursework. And I know, like, I've never really, okay, so I guess before I get into that, my background is in sociology, but I've taken plenty of courses on psychology, and I've seen, I'm definitely really hesitant to ever, like, embrace a wholly biologically essentialist claim to anything. I think that it's a part of a puzzle, and whether it's any type of any kind of innate concept, I think is an important aspect, and I think that there's a lot of validity to stuff like that depending on what we're talking about. But I really think that, even, like, I'm trying to think, like, Levi-Strauss, I believe, has made some really compelling arguments about, like, where does the innate end and the created begin. And I think, I don't know, ultimately.
Yeah,
and I love the arguments to see, like,
you set it up so well, Bert. I appreciate it, because it's a stupid question. Is it more innate or more invented? We battle it all the time in our Zooms every day. But we don't battle it. We should say it's used as a jumping off point. Because me and you could probably agree, you just took a gulp of water, that humans are probably hardwired to drink water.
I think so.
So, but then, it's like it's like breathing. But then there's breatharians. They say they live on breathing. So who knows? It's a fine line. So some of these questions at the beginning do that, innate or invented. And it's more what I'm after is your hunch. So you taught me a good word there, though. Instead of biological determinism, you call it biological essentialism. Is that the same thing, sort of?
So that's a really good question. I don't think it's the same thing. I mean, of course, it's going to depend on who you talk to. But, like, when I'm saying biological essentialism, I'm usually referring to concepts of, like, traditional binaries of biological sex. Like, someone claiming that because you have these, like, genitals and these hormones, that you are going to act a certain way. Or because you're a human, you are going to act this way. And, like, it's a very traditional, like, more social science-y type of bent to it, as opposed, it's like the old nature versus nurture argument, basically. That's a claim to nature, whereas I'm more interested. And I think there's more to be explored when we look at a nurture aspect without ignoring what nature can teach us.
Yeah, and Bert, as we go on, this is important, because I'm about rethinking my whole scripted interview.
Love that.
Challenging the questions, rewording them, but at the same time, I'm just asking you for your hunch. Like Lily Tomlin said, reality is just a collective hunch. We're just like, you study McLuhan, you know that he's just guessing,
Sure.
but again, it's this differentiation between art and science and all. So the next question is, do thoughts create emotions?
I think they can.
Yeah.
I don't think that they necessarily do, though. Well, and like, I guess I should precursor that with explaining like my own personal experience of emotions. So like in recent years, I don't know if you've seen, but in the last, I think maybe even at tops 5 years, there's been research about like neurodivergences and a gender gap in them. So like when I say neurodivergences, I mean like ADHD, being on the autism spectrum, bipolar, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm realizing I'm 31. And I think when I was 27, I was watching some YouTube videos that of a creator that explained their experience of being like a femme person who realized late into life that they're on the autism spectrum. And it really resonated with me in a way that I hadn't anticipated. Like, but I kind of pushed it back for a long time. And there's this concept that people on the spectrum experience called interoception, if I'm remembering correctly. And it's basically a difficulty being able to identify what emotions you're feeling as you're feeling them. And occasionally it also, there's another word that escapes me, but it's this idea of experiencing emotions later on. And I think that it can also, it has a lot of similarities and like interesting like parallels to people that have PTSD or like anything that basically would trigger your fight or flight response that would cause you to cope in a way that would allow you to process things later. So that's my way of saying I think that it's a bit more complicated than we usually give it credit. Like thoughts can definitely trigger emotions, but I think that sometimes our bodies have a way of manifesting a protection that makes it a bit more messier than people realize.
Yeah. No, I'll just interject really quick. I went to this big concert and I saw these groups, music groups, and then I was critical and had a good time and everything was fine. Then I went home and someone sent me a YouTube, uh, a cell phone video of that one of the main shows I wanted to see for 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And I experienced it way better.
Oh,
And it
yeah.
was like, is it because I've been online for a year and a half watching everything, making new friends? Or was it because I was less critical of looking at the audience, the venue, the people next to me, how they were doing it or how
Yeah.
they were experiencing it? So it really shocked me. And I tried to talk to people for a week about it, asking them what they think. And they were all like, that's horrible. You should have experienced it better when they were there live. I mean, some of them tended towards that. So that emotion thing, the delayed reaction,
Yeah.
it was very interesting what you just said to help me suss that out. So here's a couple more questions on thinking. I don't know what I think until I fill in the blank.
I think a lot of the time I don't know what I think until I talk about it with someone. Like I
Yeah.
said, I think that's what I really love about, like, that's what I'm going to always miss about being a student in a classroom.
Yeah.
Because that's what I've noticed. Like, so I started my PhD in August 2018, and my program is only guaranteed funding for 3 years, but we're put into a lottery for a fourth. And despite me giving up my teaching assistantship just a week or so ago, I got my fourth year of funding. So that's what makes it that much more upsetting that I had to do it. But anyway, the point of my saying that is that basically I ended my final year of coursework during spring 2020. So like, and I know that like wanting to be a student in a class is like the nerdiest thing you could possibly admit. Like most people that I've talked to that are graduate students are like, I can't wait until my coursework is up. And like, I respect I respect that. That's fine. Like, but that's not how I am. Like, that's not,
Yeah.
I'm there because I love, like, I wouldn't be in grad school if I didn't want to be. I think that it would be a terrible time. Like, I would never wish grad school on anyone, especially a PhD program, if it wasn't something that you're absolutely in love with. So, like, I really, really miss that. And that's why I'm so glad. Like, thank you for giving me an opportunity to, like, probe into my own ideas, because this is something that I really miss. You know?
Yeah,
Like,
no, I really appreciate you getting what we're doing here, because that question, I got it from McLuhan, says, I don't know what I think until I've said it. Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I wrote it.
I think
And
both. Yeah.
yeah, and then mine is, I don't know what I think until I ask somebody else what I think, what they think.
I think that makes total, all three.
Yeah, totally. But in your observations of humans, of course it's both, and it depends. Are humans more thinking beings or more feeling beings? Just in general.
I don't know if I can answer that generally. I mean, the thing is we're like, and you want to answer that in the present context, right?
Yeah, well, no, and here's the other thing. All the questions, you put them into the context you want.
Yeah. Well,
You can put them in.
I don't think, I mean, of course, I've only ever lived the life that I've lived, right? So in my lifetime, I was born in 1990, and I think that as I've aged, what I've observed is that we're expected more and more as we grow older to feel less and to think more. I think that there are countless spaces and norms and just like vices basically sold to us as a way of distancing us from feeling and instead thinking. And that's why I've appreciated different readings by media ecologists, and I by no means have read enough. I'm so new into learning about what media ecology even is, but I've appreciated the concepts of like ways in which society has evolved and like what types of mediums incline us to think introspectively. Like, of course, if we're going back to the written word, I've loved the arguments of like the written word is isolating and it propels us inward.
Yeah, that was good. And so, can humans think without language?
I think that it would be possible.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly we know. Well, I guess we don't know. I think that it's possible to think in symbols that aren't necessarily a phonetic language. I think that it's possible to think in visuals. So yeah, I mean, I guess we do know. I feel like I've seen, I don't remember what field or anything did the research or who it was done by, but I remember seeing like different gradations of like how much do you visualize, or do you visualize at all with pictures or with words? Because it seems there's people that do either or, and like sometimes it's a bit more like evocative or like just more detailed. It's like HD versus like kind of having a blur feature on what you can visualize. And right, there's also claims of like, and this would be a biological essentialist claim, I suppose, too, like the claim that males are more able to visualize it in a 360 like objects, and they're able to turn it more easily in their mind.
Wow, so, yeah. More 360. That's amazing. Yeah. I don't know if I can, but no, good. Let's move on. So Chomsky says a language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. Mm-hmm. How do you cope when language does not work? How do you cope when language breaks down?
I love that. So I've been a big fan of Chomsky's work in the past, like particularly manufacturing consent and things like that. It seems like a lot of what he's said recently, I've been kind of on the not as big of a fan of. But I think, I mean, we're seeing it right now, aren't we? Like, I mean, I guess some of us more than others. Like, you can think back to just about any amount of or any moment of great social change in history and see the answer to that, right? At least I would argue. Like, I think there's a really delegitimized wisdom in reacting to injustice when you aren't being heard, in ways that an establishment would not be a fan of. Like, how you hear differing framings of things like rioting and protesting in the streets, and all these different types of things. I think that people are going to express themselves when they have no other means to, in whatever way is necessary. And as a person who obviously is occupying a space of extreme privilege, I don't think that I have a right to judge what someone else that is experiencing a much more marginalized space than I've ever occupied. So I think that's what's most important, is recognizing like that people need and have a right to express themselves even when you don't recognize the injustices that they live on a day-to-day basis.
Wow, that's good. So these are two questions Alan Turing asked in 1950s. Is thinking a function of the soul?
Ooh, see, I never know how to answer anything when it comes to like a question of the soul. I don't even I don't even know if I believe in a soul, to be honest. Like, I'm interested. So I don't think I've already said this. I have a tendency to say it a lot. So like, when I think about theories, I usually think about them as like a bunch of different cookie cutters that I could use.
Yeah.
And I don't want to I'm not going to throw out any one cookie cutter, but I'm not going to use one cookie cutter all the time and say that it's the world's best cookie cutter, if you catch my drift.
No, it's a great answer. Let's move on, because we're going to circle around to a lot of the things, and you can suss about more. Okay. Alan Turing says, can machines think? That was the other question he asked.
I don't believe that they can yet, but I read, oh man, what's his name? I'm absolutely terrible at names. It makes me a bad academic. But what is his name? He wrote the book The Most Human Human. If you've read that.
We'll look it up, but go ahead. Cool. Yeah.
So he basically explained that right now the human or the robot equivalent to a human memorizing something, which is, being able to hold information and being able to recollect it. It's called memorization or memoization. So like MEM. Yeah. And I don't believe that it depends on how sophisticated you want to argue thinking is right now. And if we want to compare a robot's ability to think and only legitimize it if it is equivalent to a human, and what level of, like, what type of human are we going to legitimize? So I don't know. I think right now I don't know, but I think it's off the table.
That was good. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
I think meaning, for sure. Yeah, I think anyone that's ever talked to me would I mean, I've lived a lot of happiness and a lot of tragedy. So I think what's most important is, regardless of what status you're currently situated, that you find meaning in it.
There's no right or wrong answers to any of these questions, but that one you got right, Bird. Does the brain, and again, does the human, I might change this, the brain, the human, more detect consciousness or create it? Like, is consciousness bubbling away and we're detecting it, or are we creating it? And again, it's just more, and you don't have to say one or the other,
I think, and it seems like, right, it's like a chicken or the egg kind of question. I think that we create it first, and then we, through observing it, continue recreating it.
Right. That's good. Okay. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
I feel like that I'm not scientifically qualified to know.
Here's a poet, Audre Lorde. She said, "You can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools." Yvonne Rainer responded to her, "You can if you expose the tools." What new tool do you suggest?
I think I would be a hypocrite, which I definitely am known of to be, if I didn't argue that in some senses the internet is capable of doing that, in the sense of like consciousness raising. Obviously we have yet to see, I mean, we've seen events where it's sparked different potentials for change, and I think that there's a tendency to kind of dismiss the usefulness of like sparking other people's ideas as opposed to turning those ideas into action. So I think the internet is the best case we've seen thus far, but of course there's many issues with accessibility across the world still, so
Yeah.
it's not
No,
it's
it's a great answer. People read into it. I mean, it's the tool. Look at it's enabled us to do this so easily. All we had to do is hit one little button, and it's like, wow. I mean, I've done interviews for 35 years, and I had to wait like, oh, well, when am I going to be in Ohio, or when are you going to be in Venice?
Yeah.
And then can you come over? And then I got to hit a audio cassette button and it doesn't work right. And like, thank God for Clint knowing which button to push, and he does it so well. So what do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
I think nowadays it's mainly just, okay, so like I've never been in a happier, more stable or privileged position in my life. So like I'm not worrying about me, other than like if I ever leave my house, which I don't anymore. I avoided all of the welcome events this week for my department and campus, but I'm honestly just always more concerned of like the state of the world and like the lengths at which other humans in more comfortable positions go out of their way to ensure that people who don't have their level of comfort, they'll just make sure that like I've never understood like the level of wealth that certain individuals in the world have is just, it's unbelievable and it's unnecessary, and that we could just move that wealth and literally just let other people have a place to live and make sure that the ways in which we're constructing the world aren't destroying it, like, and we're just not like it blows my mind, like I just can't. So that's what I worry about ultimately, like. And it sucks because obviously it's like I know I'm not naive. Like I mean I am naive sometimes, but I'm not naive to knowing I can't change that by myself. But I'm hoping that like me even saying things that I don't see other people say might spark ideas and like show people that like if they are thinking about those things before they fall asleep, that like they're not the only one. Because I think a lot of the time problems reproduce themselves because people think that they can't say something, so they remain silent.
Yeah. It's like a sort of cliche thing I say, I know rich kids, and I go, it's not their fault they're rich. It's not their fault. And they usually learn how to be cool and love other people from their black nannies. And it's like, oh my God, thank God somebody turned them on to, and it's not to blame their parents. It's just like that blaming doesn't work in my opinion, but it's sussing out the big picture. Like you're doing so well. So McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of the things we invent so that we can cope with what we don't like.
Yeah.
So McLuhan, one of his main things was, well, why do we still ignore the hidden psychic effects, even though the artists, filmmakers, and poets are revealing them to us? So how would you answer that? Why do humans still ignore them?
I absolutely love, like, that's so, like I said, I'm still so new into media ecology, but that's one of my like top 5 favorite perspectives that McLuhan brings to us in general. And I mean, it's hard for me. I was a part of a research study that was actually primarily social scientists, so I kind of stuck out ideologically like a sore thumb. It was about fake news. And it's impossible for me, as someone who's been immersed in whether it's sociology or in my master's, I focused on critiques of transnational and global media. So, like media monopolies, the ways in which ownership and gatekeeping affects what type of events get broadcast, the motivations for why those things do get broadcast, and the ways in which they're tailored to meet certain concepts of reality. And of course, specifically, that's all influenced by neoliberalism and the way that the government in America, in the United States, is run, through concepts of the two-party system. So whether that's Democrats or Republicans, this very corporate-minded logic of what is acceptable and what's unacceptable. And so I think, to get into your actual answer, what's made a lot of sense to me in understanding why this could continue, like why misinformation and disinformation and fake news is so prevalent, is both the profit orientation as well as recognizing that, ultimately, people can only understand something as far as they've both understood themselves and if they have the eyes to see a certain thing. Like, you can read something right at one point in your life and understand it in an entirely different way than you did at another point.
Yeah.
And I think that unfortunately there are, just countless barriers between, and whether that's paywalls or just, educational access, and the erasure of the barriers between people. Like, we don't talk about the lack of literacy enough. We don't talk about the rates at which people aren't able to gain knowledge in a way that I think is important. And that's like a bigger precursor to the issue of why people can't appreciate or understand art in the way that could push us forward, that in a more useful way.
Yeah, that was really well put. I appreciate that. And so, can you conjure up your earliest memory ever, or one of them?
Okay, so this is like really weird. I don't know why this happened, but okay, so one of my earliest memories, I was probably like 3 or 4, and it was like I was with my family on a vacation to, I don't know if it was Disney World or Disneyland, because I always forget which one it is. But those like enormous like projectors that they have almost on like a water tower. I was watching, so it was like maybe 7 or 8 at night, I would guess, based on, it was kind of dusk. And there's this song, I don't remember what it's called, but I think it was a Rob Thomas song, oddly enough. And it was this music video of this man in a tower singing about, like, the lyrics escape me, which, but it was just like so sad. It was just about like being in a tower and like missing someone and not being able to get to them. And I was like 4 years old. Like, I got out of my stroller and was like standing, and there was all these people walking around, and I'm watching this sad music video from the 90s, like just having a moment. I feel like it was like it made no sense, and I had no like means or capability to process it. But I was standing there like, no one else is stopping and watching this Rob Thomas music video right now.
No, that's amazing. So, do you think memory is more a curse or more a blessing?
I think it depends on what your memories are comprised of.
Yeah. Can you tell me someone, or please tell me someone in your immediate family, and then outside your immediate family, just briefly, who was a role model or had an impact on you? And specifically, what was that impact?
So I have a sister that's 11 years older than me, and originally I went to school in 2008. I started college at Ball State, actually, for social work, because she went into social work. And I was like, I really want to do something with people. Like, I was always that friend growing up in my teens and like early 20s, like giving people advice. And I was like, I really want to do this. Like, I feel like I could do it. And then, yeah, I think I was really heavily influenced by her doing that. And I basically just never looked into colleges or anything. So I was like, yeah, Ball State's an accredited school for social work, and Marcy did it, so I'll do it too. I think it was a positive. I mean, if anything, it didn't pan out. Like, I left after the first year because I was like, this isn't gonna allow me to help people in the way that I think I would be able to best serve. Like, I don't know how much you've seen about social work, but there's so many legal barriers. You know, of course, again, attached to the overall system. You're only able to give people so many resources, but I think if anything, it led me down a path that got me here. So I'm grateful for it.
No, that was good. And so outside your immediate family, someone who had an impact on you, and what was that?
I think probably starting grad school. So the only reason that I ended up other than my sister, you know, going into social work and things. So the reason why I ended up starting grad school is because I went to a Greenpeace leadership retreat in 2014. And I know it's so weird, totally unattached to communications specifically, but I went because I ended up joining my campus environmental club, and someone there who I don't even remember who it was, I explained my situation. I was a junior in my bachelor's at the time in sociology, and I was like, I don't like what I'm doing. Like, I like what I'm doing, but it's not going to take me anywhere. It's not going to I can't really get a job with a bachelor's in sociology as far as I could tell. At least doing the things that I would like to do. So someone there was like, based on what you're saying, I think you should go into communication. Like, I think you would really like it. Just like take up a course. And I came back from that and I talked to my advisor, and she signed me up for a graduate level course in rhetoric. And I think the person, so I know it was a total mistake. It was, I don't know what I was doing there, but I absolutely loved it. And so my answer would either be the person that I don't remember who happened to catalyze me to do that in the first place, or the instructor who happened to be the dean of students, who really just like was like, you have a lot of things that you're saying that people should hear, and you love this, like, this is, and I was like, thank you. I do. I just thought like this my whole life and had no idea that this was something people did, like. So yeah.
Great, super answer, because I'm such a name dropper, and I love when people say, well, I don't know their name, but that had an impact, and that's fine. We don't have to have the names of everyone. Like Joyce said, love thy label as thyself. It's like, what? So the other thing is, did you know the founder of Greenpeace was a McLuhan freak?
You know what? I think I remember learning that not too long ago, like reading maybe Jacqueline McLeod Rogers' most recent book, and I thought like, wow, like it's just
That is so
weird little things that like tie me to media ecology in ways that I hadn't anticipated years before. But yeah, that is really crazy.
it is, it's cool.
Mm-hmm.
And so did your parents raise you a particular religion?
Yeah, so I was technically, I was raised Roman Catholic, and I was definitely like, I've written poems. Really, I guess only one now that I think about it, about like sitting in church as a kid and like sitting there thinking like, I don't believe in this. Like, and it's not no fault to anyone. Like, I don't want to like rain on anyone's spiritual parade. I think people should be able to believe whatever they want as long as it's like not hurting anyone, you know. But I would sit there like in the pew, like tracing the shapes on the outside of the Bible, like, and yeah, I don't know. I was made to go to CCD, so like I was, you know, I had my communion and my confirmation, but like I was told that if I didn't, I wouldn't have a place to live. So it's not like it was given, you know, I wasn't given a choice.
Do you pray?
Not in a organized religious kind of way, but I
Yeah.
think I pray in the sense of, I think my writing is a type of prayer, if you could say that. It's like a means of processing and moving on, and yeah, just kind of transmuting the things that have happened to me into a more I don't know if I'd say self-actualized, but at least a more healthy and stable sense of self.
Beautiful. So, if God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
I've had this like little joke that I've told people for a few years, and basically, I don't know if you've ever played like video games at all, or like specifically role-playing video games, but like I think that what would be the funniest, and I guess this kind of taps into simulation theory a little bit if you want to go there. When you play any kind of Elder Scrolls game, so like Elder Scrolls Morrowind or Oblivion or Skyrim, you can open up the menu and see a complete statistical tabulation of everything you've ever done. So like if you so like if you've gone in to a house and like taken a piece of jewelry, or like, you know, talk to a town's member or whatever, I think it would be really funny to like see a credit score of everything I've ever done in my life and just like see it all play out. So I guess I'm kind of hoping God would be a social scientist, which is very unlike me. I don't know. Yeah, I got more to think about there.
I think Clinton may like that one.
Yeah.
Because he thinks everybody should know how to fix their cell phone, their laptop, or at least know how it works. No one cares. They just go, oh, okay, just buy a new one, whatever. That was good. Bird, do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
Ooh, so I love there's been times where if academia, you know, with the state of carpet education and all, like I've been like, if academia doesn't work out, I would love to just purely continue focusing on like horror films. Like I've grew up on like the Sci-Fi Channel and watching a lot of horror movies. So I'm fascinated in the concept of evil, and specifically like my big thing for some reason is I have this fascination with found footage horror film. So like I don't know if you're familiar with that particular style, but like basically it's usually not shot with an actual script, and the characters will have like handheld cameras, and whether that's like a legit camera or like a smartphone or whatever nowadays. Um,
You mean like Blair Witch?
yes, exactly. Like
Okay.
Blair
Okay.
Witch
Go
is like
ahead.
one of the first main
Yeah.
famous found footage horror films. And
Yeah.
specifically, I'm fascinated with concepts of possession. So, like, it can be haunted houses or, you know, a haunted object or whatever, but possession is really, really striking to me for some reason. And I think it's just the sheer, like, mythological persistence of it all. And this, like, usually very Western concept of like what evil is and like who gets possessed, which is usually a feminine person, and they're usually possessed by a demon that is masculine. Like I'm talking out of hundreds that I've seen, that's usually what it is. And this is all to say that like I think our concepts of media, especially within my lifetime, and I think arguably the generations before me that are still alive, we've been heavily influenced by both organized concepts of religion as well as like what those themes have morphed into in our medias. So I think that I don't think that anyone is born evil. I think that evil is of course a construct, and unfortunately nowadays I think it's most important to recognize that like the much more pervasive evil is well-intentioned people doing things that are malicious in a way that they don't realize.
Yeah. That's well put. Malicious is a great word, in that they don't realize. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
they don't think they're doing something
No,
wrong.
sure.
So, that goes right along with the next question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? I'm going to set up with a few
Mm,
modern thinkers. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK says, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And
sure.
Fellini says, I need an enemy. So the question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you specifically react to the Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Well, and I think I love this question, especially nowadays with the internet, right? Because like in despite the fact that before I said, okay, there's so much power in being able to utilize the internet to connect. In that connection isn't just positivity, right? It's not all rainbows. Like it's definitely, there's so much power of just spreading sheer hate, right? So I think depending on what your enemy does to you is really gonna change how you react. And I think that sometimes, and it's also gonna change depending on anyone space that you're in mentally and physically. Because like if you're like energetically drained, you gotta respect your own boundaries and make sure that you aren't feeding into it. Just like I think Watts is speaking to here, right? Like I think it's important that we don't give it a one size fits all kind of diagnosis, and that we are able to like give ourselves the space to know when we want to engage and when it's just not worth our time to engage.
Good. Thank you. In fact, you brought up Levi Strauss. I love this one. I always leave it out. Cannibals boil friends and roast enemies. That's like, whoa. James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin over 100 years ago. He basically checked out of his own movie theater. He says, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? I'm glad you're cracking up. And then Faulkner years later said sometimes fiction is better than journalism. The best fiction is better than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
I love that. Like before, so I guess I should probably precursor. So I moved into a new complex in March, and it's much nicer than any place I've ever lived in my adult life. But there's a porch that's, if I hadn't done anything with it, it's just an enormous cement patch that like it's very I don't know, it's very like corporal and like uninviting. So what I did is I went on horrible Bezos.com and I got a bunch of like really tacky astroturf and these plastic trellises with these purple flowers on them and two big umbrellas that are red and like some comfy chairs and stuff, right? And so I know that when I'm sitting on my porch next to actual patches of living grass, I'm sitting in the plastic version of that. But this is in my space, the only accessible means through which I can have a space that makes me feel more comfortable than a very dehumanizing cement patch. So I think the point of why I'm saying that is because I think that sometimes people need that because that's the only space that is accessible to them. And I think that, you know, it's going back to what we talked about before, like we all want to like collect and be able to process things in means through which make us comfortable. And I think that we see so much of that nowadays, right? And whether that's because of lack of access or our own levels of comfortability or the way in which, you know, neoliberal capitalism just commodifies all aspects of our lives and tries to sell us replications of things that humans already do. Like, yeah, I love that question. It's really interesting.
No, it was really well put, and it reminds me of, I love to study films.
Cool.
Now I sort of think it's stupid to watch them, but I've watched enough films, but I still will watch films. But I never am attracted after being submerged in the violence of the 70s as art form. And you know, showing Carrie at a college campus and everybody just freaks out when the arm comes up at the end, you know. I mean, that, would you rate that as a pretty good horror film?
Honestly, okay, so I haven't rewatched Carrie in my adult life. Like the last time I saw Carrie, I was probably like 9 or 10. Like it was before I could actually like
Right.
in a way that like would mean anything to me. Like
Right.
I think it's interesting though. I don't think I
Right, but
remember.
anyways,
It's bullying, basically, right? Like that's the
yeah,
premise.
but anyways, it's like the first Carrie Brian De Palma's, and so
Mhm.
you know I've experienced horror films, but I have no interest in watching violent films or horror films. But the fact that they exist and that somebody like you's intelligence says I'm attracted to studying why this phenomenon exists, and
Yeah.
I'm immersed in it enough to have a critical aesthetic for it, you know, then
Mhm.
I can look to you. Hey, you know, I know people who are horror film freaks, and then you go, and it just helps you suss out why do humans reframe things in
Yeah.
this setting or that setting, you know,
Mhm.
because you know it's sort of sad in the media ecology world that there's no poor people and there's not a lot of blacks and there's not, you know,
Sure.
it's like it's all males, you know, it's all white males and blah blah blah. So
You're
you know,
preaching to the choir here, Jerry. Clinton
well,
knows.
you
I'm
know,
sure he's just
you
laughing
you
at you
you
and you like.
you weren't you weren't there. I have to tell it really quick. I was on a panel with Andrew Crystal and a woman, and this was the MEA before. I don't know when it was years ago, and
Sure.
I could look it up. But I said the woman was on our panel. I says it's so good to have ladies on our panel, and
Mhm.
she got up and said, "I'm not a lady,"
Jerry, oh
and
my
it's like,
God. Wait,
and I was like,
wait. You were the first
I
person
was saying,
I ever talked to at the MEA convention in person. You told me the same story. Do you remember
oh, so
that?
that's when, because I, oh, good, because
I
well,
remember
it
that
was it in then was it in
in
where
2016.
did we
Oh no,
was
I
it in
wasn't
the
there for the original event, but you told me this story and I remember, well, cuz like so here's the thing. Like I know, like I get it. Trust me. I get and your
yeah,
intention, I believe your intention was good.
yeah,
But I know that
my
there's
attention was right, but I
yeah,
said thanks for teaching me the right
yeah,
word I should have used.
sure,
Yeah,
yeah. Well, and
yeah,
like but what's most important, right? And like we talked about this in person like at the beginning of the 2019 convention in Toronto. Like it's again less about intention and more about impact. And I think what's most
yeah,
important is like clearly you were receptive to like
yeah,
acknowledging, even though of course like she expressed upset and like, you know,
yeah,
yeah, I think what's most important is you were like, you know what,
yeah.
okay.
I said, "Thank you for teaching me." And then
Yeah.
she also said, "I'm not funny," because I was funny and she got
Oh,
up there and was serious. And then the next day at the cafeteria line, she was like flirting with me. And I was like, "What?"
the world works in mysterious ways.
Yeah, it was all okay. I learned from it. Anyways, tell us your journey on just briefly how you got to that point where you go, okay, you know, you told us the great Greenpeace sociology, and then your journey to McLuhan and your journey to writing poetry. Like, where were you reading it growing up and go, I can do that at what age, or just those two sort of through lines?
Okay, so I think poetry was first. Like I was writing and reading a lot of what I would consider like I don't know, I don't give it enough credit. I've read a lot of poetry, some of it I'm not as fond of, and some of it that I am. And I think that there's an important growth process in any type of creative process, you know, and development where you read stuff that like you need to learn so that you can grow past it. You know what I mean? So basically I started a blog in I think it was either 2016 or 2017 during my master's, and it's linked on my website too that I gave you. It's called Wazo Words, and I was just writing a lot, and I was also drinking too much, so a lot of it isn't good. But it was the means through which I basically processed a lot of things that I've lived through that are traumatic and things that I'm not supposed to say, right? So I think it's been a really good space for me to like hash out the things that society tells feminine people that we're not supposed to say, and like a good means to like kind of push those boundaries. And then honestly, the only reason why I've even like done anything more with poetry is because during my PhD now I applied to this or I submitted, I didn't apply, to this Women, Gender, Sexuality Studies Symposium, and I won first place during the first time that I did it. So I was like, hey, maybe people actually like these words that I'm writing down. Maybe I'll keep doing that. And even though it was a small event, I was like, that's great. Like someone likes this and it resonated. And so I was like happy to see that. And then when it comes to media ecology, that's a little bit different. So like originally I actually first heard about media ecology because my best friend for my master's, during one of our master's courses, was reading a book, and I don't remember, it must have been a book on McLuhan, I would presume, but she was like, hey, or they, sorry, not she goes by they now, so they were reading a book on McLuhan, and they were like, you should read this, I think you'd really like it. And I was like, that sounds stupid, I'm not gonna read that. And so I didn't, and I pushed it away because I was obviously in a bad place. Like I said, it was peak poetry time, so I was not ready to process or learn about things that I might be interested in a way that I like to believe I'm a little better at now. So I got into my PhD, and then I took a basic intro to comm course that we're all required to take. And Dr. John Dowd was the instructor there, and he told us more about it, and I was like, wow, I love this. This is everything that I've loved. This is exactly the approach that I've been looking for, and the things that I've been doing that other people are usually like, that doesn't make any sense. These are broad connections, blah, blah, blah. And then I also found out, actually, because we read not only Understanding Media by McLuhan, but Speaking into the Air by John Durham Peters. And I found out after that semester ended, actually, that my mentor in my master's, who is a huge influence on my transnational and media knowledge, his mentor in his PhD was John Durham Peters. So I was like, oh, this all makes sense why I'm the one that likes this book that's very media ecologically oriented, whereas a lot of other people do not. And anyway, so that took me into actually writing a paper that was the left book paper. Like that first year here, I wrote that left book paper that ended up winning the top convention paper at MEA. And like I said, it was a whirlwind in both a good and a bad way attending my first MEA convention, because like I told you before the stream began, I won, someone came up and said, oh, your paper won the top convention paper. But then the next day or something like that, I was actually approached by the last living member that's ever worked with McLuhan, and he sexually harassed me. And I'm
wow.
Something where I speak about it very frankly, because at this point, with everything that I've lived through, I don't believe that survivors have anything to be ashamed of. Like, what this man did isn't anything that is my responsibility. And the progress that's actually happened from that, because of the means through which people in MEA advocated for me, there was a misconduct committee created. Basically, anyone that in the beginning started writing more about merging feminism and media ecology was almost, it seems to have all started around the same time. So like the MEA member advocacy for me in response to what happened that first MEA, both the top convention paper as well as like this more personal matter, it means the world to me to have that kind of support and know that, like, despite the fact that there are issues we need to reckon with in the field and in academia in large, and you could pan out to the largest world scope, all of these built-in impact-related over-intention problems, that we can move forward and that we need to. And it's been so great to see, like, the this gender and media ecology special issue that came out earlier this year. And I don't know if you saw Christine L. Nystrom's book was finally published earlier this year as well, who's a woman that was actually accredited with coining the word media ecology, although other scholars have been accredited. Clearly there's many definitions to it, but yeah, so I think that's a good place to, even though it's not the most ideal circumstances, I'm grateful for everything that anyone in MEA has done for me so far, and the trajectory has been wild but good.
Wow, what a that was very well articulated. Thank you. Christine's last name, the woman who wrote the book.
I'm so bad at spelling things out loud without being able to write them down. Nystrom, I believe.
Okay, thank you. And so, tell me though, early in your life, when you sort of started to first write poetry, were you getting it from song lyrics? Were you reading Emily Dickinson? I mean, where would that, and also feminism, where did you first like even sense what feminism is? Just the birthplace for those two little germs, those two little stars. Yeah.
So I mean, like I said, I was reading, since I was so heavily influenced by the internet, like throughout my whole life, I was reading like Zynga blogs on whatever people wanted to talk about. And sometimes it was poetry. Other times, for some reason, I was just like looking up quotes or like, but again, I love that you bring up the idea of lyrics, because I think music has always been a really big influence in anything, like as far as like, I use lyrics, particularly of songs, as a means to process, and I always have throughout my whole life. So like that definitely is a big influence as well. Like I was, again, a millennial. I was an emo kid in my early teens, and I was going to punk shows, and really heavily influenced by like the really angsty, like just typical 90s teen, well, I guess early 2000s teen kind of stuff. But I don't know, I wasn't really writing too much. Like I didn't actually write a lot until probably about 2016, 2017 was like when it really just took off. That's what's so like odd thinking back and like having the like positive response that I have recently to my work, because like I wouldn't have ever anticipated that, to be honest. And I think when it comes to feminism, I mean, so like I said, I was born and raised in Northwest Indiana, and like the area that I grew up in is probably one of the two most progressive parts of the state, considering Indiana's history. And I don't know, I think that I was raised in a upper middle class part of America that's at the same time very like, the town that I lived in was very white and middle class and just ripe with every type of discrimination imaginable. Like, for all intents and purposes, I should be a terrible discriminatory person. Like, there's no reason why I should think anything that I do now, because I've been immersed in and also perpetuated for the need to fit in for most of my life. I've been a horribly discriminatory person because of the surroundings that I was immersed in. And so, despite the fact that the part of the country that I was in is apparently the most socioeconomically and racially diverse area, being that it's so close to Chicago, there are these bubbles of white America that like perpetuate this horrible, just unnecessary hate because of, again, like you're in this bubble where you're afraid to drive to Gary that's 5 minutes away because you're going to, get robbed or whatever other bullshit racist narrative. So yeah, I think I didn't start learning about feminism, to be honest, until my early 20s. Like I was I mean, I've lived so many lives looking back, right? Like we could all say that, but like I was very, very different exactly a decade ago. Like so I started reading because of my master's, actually. Well, I guess maybe a little bit in sociology. I read a little bit about feminism, but then when I started my master's, it really like kickstarted me into feminist rhetoric, and I started reading a lot more like on the side about specifically like intersectional feminism and concepts of like the ways in which any type of discrimination compound on each other, and like all of it really spoke to me, and I was like, wow, the people that I'm around are really influencing me in bad ways, and like they're reinforcing these things, and if I say anything about what I'm learning, they're getting offended, and then they're reacting to me in a really negative way. So like, yeah, it's been a long road.
No, that was good. And so when you're writing your poetry, what role does intention play in the creative process? So I'll set up. A screenwriting teacher told me great art great poem, great film is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great film is when you can clearly not see the intention of the creator. What role does intention play when you're writing a poem?
So actually I haven't thought about this a whole lot, but at last MEA, I organized the art exhibit that we've done. We only did it for the second time this year, but we were talking a little bit about this. And for me, like my process of writing, like it's weird. Like I don't sit down and like say I'm gonna write. Like the way that my poems arrive is like I'll be laying in bed. Okay, like actually I guess attached to your previous question, what are the things that you think about before you go to bed? Like my poetry is what comes out of my head when I'm not thinking about anything. Like it just kind of like a phrase or something will like pop into my head, and then like I'll feel compelled to take my phone and open up my notes app and like jot it down, and then the rest comes out, and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's total trash.
Yeah.
And, I mean, yeah, so intention I think is almost, I mean, well, but so that initially the intention isn't really there. Like I almost feel like it's out of my control, like because it's something that like is being like given to me in a way that almost doesn't even feel like mine, like, which is weird, but it is mine, of course, because the way that I'm translating it is through the framing of my own experience. So it becomes intentional, where the way in which I'm framing it on the page and the way in which I shrink it down to a few words, because I don't know if you've seen any of my poetry, but I usually keep it very, very thin, purposefully, as a means of like demonstrating that like this is a language that me as a feminine person, I've been taught to constrain the things that I say. I'm supposed to be very small, and it's like kind of a play on that. And occasionally I will expand out the lines in a way that like is purposeful as well, to show of like a messier kind of human quality to it. So I also use capitalization very specifically, like how I said I don't capitalize my nickname on purpose because of feminist influencers like Bell Hooks, who very purposefully didn't capitalize her, still does not. Of course, she's still alive, does not capitalize her name. And I know Data Void also doesn't for their own reason. But I utilize capitalization because of our rhetorical understandings and norms of capitalization and like what capitalization conveys about power and the ability to speak on something. So, yeah, I think my process is very intentional. And a lot of the time I also use, sorry to cut you off, by the way, I use a lot of puns. And so like, and also like words that depending on what their spelling is like, means very different things. So I very intentionally like to create pieces that like have little either knowable or unknowable double or triple or quadruple meanings to them.
Brilliant. That was so well put because it evokes so much. Marshall said of James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake, he said, Joyce used the pun as the paradoxical exuberance of being through language.
Yeah.
I mean, that like says it all, like paradoxical exuberance. I love that.
Yeah.
But you have to look up Ruth Weiss. She is the woman who first, there's a doc on her. It might be available, but she is the woman who first did live poetry readings with jazz. Though the guys, Rex Roth or whoever, or Kidsburg or Kerouac, the guys say they did it, but Ruth was the one, and she spells her name with all smalls. And
really?
she just passed, but she is the spunkiest, greatest. I mean, she was probably 95 and she lived up in the redwoods. She amazing woman. So all smalls, like all small. So when Duchamp says there's no art without an audience, when you're writing your poem, how much are you thinking of your audience?
Yeah, well, and honestly, that's a better and more like dead-on question to what we were talking about at MEA, now that I think about it. I think I'm always writing for me, ultimately, but I think that I'm also writing for anyone that's lived similar experiences to me. Because I think, I mean, I was thinking about this the last few days a lot, actually, like, especially with COVID and the level of isolation that like many of us who live alone are experiencing now. Like, it's funny and interesting to think about the point of getting a degree or not getting a degree and gaining any level of knowledge. Like, what's the point? I mean, it's not, I obviously believe that there's a point. I love it. There's nothing else I would rather be doing. But to an extent, like, if you can't talk about it with someone, like, what are you doing? You're just a dragon sitting on your gold coins. Like, it's like, okay, so for me, like, I think it's intentional, and like I'm hoping, like I've said before, like the point of me saying anything is because I'm hoping that it will spark an idea in someone else that like could either provoke. And I obviously this is a lot what you do, it seems like, as well with these interviews. Like, I love the concept of sparking a different perspective at someone. And I think I have a tendency, though, unfortunately, this is unintentional, I guess, to sort of play off of your question. I have an untactful way at which I communicate oftentimes. And again, I think it ties back to the potential of me being neurodivergent. But like, I provoke people, I think, in a way that is not productive a lot of the time. And I make my choices, like we all do. But I think that I wish people looked at conflict less negatively. I think that conflict is one of the most productive forms of information gathering that we can have. Like, there's no progress without conflict. And I think,
I totally agree. My line is, great art fucks your shit up and says, I can do that. And that's like, if you fuck somebody's shit up, then you're succeeding. But it's just like that if they punch you out or, they shoot you, then I don't know, that it does happen.
Sure.
But your thing about what Marshall did, he was probably more proud of influencing Abby Hoffman. Abby Hoffman says, McLuhan was my main influence, and he goes to the stock market and throws dollar bills to all these stock market. They're like, and he does things that are real.
Yeah.
It takes the same with Tim Leary. People love to hate Tim Leary or diss him. And it's like, he wrote 33 books and he got his slogan from Marshall. So, there's ways Marshall, I'll send you this list, has infiltrated popular culture, and not just consumable popular culture, but important thinkers, who did something, and not just talked about it. There was action, with it. So what's more, this perfect follow-up is, what's more important, conviction or compromise?
Ooh. I think anyone, like I said, anyone that's ever talked to me would know that I'm pointing towards conviction. Like, I'm no stranger to burning bridges. I'm definitely like, and what I mean, I think, again, we all make our choices, and I think what's most important is recognizing what is most important to you. Like, for me, I mean, I don't know. I think that there's an importance in having a certain level of comfortability in yourself without needing to rely on anyone else, because of course it becomes very problematic if you are only expecting someone else to meet your needs in a way that you are neglecting to be able to do yourself. And I think, again, since there's so many things in our society that keep us from that feeling experience rather than the thinking experience, like, and there's like this tendency to over intellectualize, myself included, any type of issue. Yeah, I think it's really important that we keep these things in check, and that we know when we want to hold our convictions versus keeping a bond.
Yeah. So Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength, rather than overcome, we're taught to overcome the weakness.
Sure.
Rather, we could actually incorporate the weakness to become a strength. Tell
Yeah.
me a weakness that you've flipped into a strength, a breakdown that you've flipped into a breakthrough.
There's so many of those. I mean, again, if you're just throwing out all of my favorite media ecological concepts here, breakdown and breakthrough, other than art, is like my main go-to because it speaks to me so much. So I'm surprised I haven't actually mentioned this yet, because this is one of those things that like is a huge part of my identity. So like I've had an anxiety disorder my whole life, and at least I thought that it was, and may actually have been more prone to, again, like my neurodivergence possibility. But I mean, I held off on teaching or taking a public speaking course until my junior year of undergrad because I was so afraid. Um, and then a couple years later, like in that first semester of my master's, I was expected and I was encouraged to apply to be a teaching assistant, because I was at one of the master's programs in the country that actually allows master's students to teach as an instructor of record. So like I had no idea that that's actually a very rare thing. But I was teaching public speaking 2 years later, and it was terrifying. I mean, but at the same time, it really like put my concepts of like the ways in which we create the world into action. Like it really showed me for the first time in a very like serious and invigorating but scary way that like roles in our society are basically just people going in and not knowing what they're doing, and then they fake it until they make it. So I think the way that I've adopted and incorporated anxiety into my teaching is being very transparent with my students now about the fact that I have a lifelong anxiety disorder, and that if anyone knows about being afraid of public speaking, it's me. Like it's so scary, and it doesn't have to be, but I think that like that's one, I think, other inclination of these digital technologies that either people in my generation specifically or Gen Z, it seems like at least there's a lot more social aversion to being able to speak your mind in a person-to-person context or on the phone in a way that's much more intimate. Like, I don't know if you've seen that yourself, but like we're more inclined again to speak in text because maybe Gen Z is more used to it now with like platforms like TikTok. But anyway, my point is that I think like that's definitely been a huge part of how I've molded my sense of self now. And it's so weird because I've given like, I mean, I just counted a few weeks ago, I've given 20 conference presentations at this point. Like it's something that like, I know it's too many not to humble brag, but like that's something that like 25-year-old me would have never even imagined. Like, so it's crazy to see how much you can really just, if you face your fears and like do it even though you're terrified, like it can really change who you are.
Really inspiring, Bird. That touched me deeply, and it really evoked this question. If you're walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Oh man. See, okay, I've answered this on Twitter as a half joke before, and I've said, don't trust men, which in some sense, and I mean this with all due respect, but throughout my life, because of the norms that we live in as a society, I've been shown time and time again that when I've put trust into certain people, that trust has not been worth, I shouldn't have. Like, and I think that this is something, of course, I would not say all men, so just putting it out there in case anyone is provoked by that. But I think with the rates of violence that exist in our country or in the world overall, that's definitely what I would say. Because I think if I could talk to me at 12, I would say, like, focus on yourself, like but at the same time, honestly, I don't know if I would say anything at all, because I think that the way things have played out has been exactly as they should, even though I've experienced things that no one should. Like I said, I'm in a place I've never been more comfortable in. So yeah, between those two things.
No, it's good. You're doing something I learned from McLuhan too. He loved to quote Pascal, the mathematician philosopher. He says, in order to know anything, big picture, comprehensive awareness, you have to know this end of the spectrum and that, and everything in between.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like your cookie cutter thing is like, I
Yeah.
like a lot of cookie cutters. It's not like I'm going to gravitate and just use this one. That,
Yeah.
you know, there is the big picture. I mean, it is pattern recognition
Sure.
equals comprehensive awareness. We're after the big picture.
Mm-hmm.
And so, is perception reality?
I love that too. Jerry, you're just throwing out all of these just absolute killer questions. I think
Thanks.
so. Again, I wrote maybe, I guess, not this year. Yeah, the year before at MEA, the first virtual MEA, I presented a paper on the bot written script trend. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. Okay, so if you're not here, I don't know how much you're on like social media at all, but basically there's this trend that was created where, you know, like bots, like AI, or like, you know,
Yeah.
you can make social media profiles for them. So there's this trend where someone, they would start out and they would say, I fed 1,000 hours of like Olive Garden commercials into a bot, and then it wrote this script for me. And it's super funny. It just looks really like disjointed and word salady and like just total nonsense. But it's funny because it looks like a bot watched 1,000 hours of Olive Garden commercials and then wrote this script. But it turns out like it's actually not even written by a bot, which makes it funnier. So it kind of blurred the lines between like what is human and what is bot. And like, why are we creating this parody of bots in the first place? Like, what are we afraid of? So I think I basically launched in like, does reality even matter? Like, so and that's quite the leap. But this was like my case study into asking that, and because I think the trend kind of reveals to us like in satire and parody, it does to an extent, sure, but like we all, based on like the trajectory of how technologies have played out, the more that exist, the farther away it's, like the further deviation from humans themselves, like we've talked about throughout this interview as well. Like, and there's been so many theorists that have asked about the niches of reality, right? Like especially Baudrillard, like concepts of hyper reality and stuff. So I think this is all to say that I think perception definitely matters, but like we can never, I think that we need to have the patience and give people grace to recognize that like sometimes people just aren't going to get it. Sometimes not everyone is going to understand where you're coming from, and it's inevitable. And that's what I think I've had the hardest time. That's why I think a lot of communication theorists like don't pick up what I'm putting down and like don't want to give it the time of day, because the field in a traditional sense is very heavily built upon concepts that miscommunication can be avoided, and I don't believe that at all. I think that it's something that's inevitable, and I think that that's what I love about me like media ecology, because it is less a value judgment and more of a, hey, there's benefits and there's negatives, if you want to use those terms. There's consequences to any of these things.
That was brilliant. Jean Cocteau said, when you create your first, you know, speaking engagement paper at MEA or whatever the criticism is, you know, whatever your peers criticize you, exploit that for the rest of your career. You know, like your first kid drawing, you go, you drew outside the lines, so then just do that the rest of your career. So you get the idea. It's like, you know, it's sort of like predicting breakdown and breakthrough. But
Yeah.
also the Dada Rock guy I really love
Oh,
is Captain Beefheart. He said his poem is, the stars are matter, we are matter, but it doesn't matter.
I love that. See, that's
Yeah,
exactly, yeah, that's exactly up my alley. Like that,
yeah.
that fun where you're playing with all the meanings. I think again, you're preaching to the choir when it comes to art and what we can exploit.
So Lewis Carroll said, I believe as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. Have you believed in any impossible things lately?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Well, and I don't remember if I've talked about this, if we talked about it before the stream started or during, but I think at least others would call it impossible. I don't believe it's impossible. Clearly. I believe that I need to believe that within my lifetime, corporate as education is going to be done away with, and that we're going to shift towards something that is student and faculty and staff centered versus something that's profit centered. And whether that's because of the current COVID shenanigans that's happening, or just so that I can continue doing, like I said, whenever anyone asks me, like, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? I usually don't have any idea how to answer that. But like, for the first time in my life, I'm like, I would do the exact same things I'm doing right now, but I would just do it for a livable wage. Like, I mean, grad students and adjuncts around the country are being exploited to an extent that people don't talk about enough. It's completely unsustainable. And from what I've heard from the grapevine, tenured faculty are talking about stepping down. Like it's like a huge unspoken, or at least silent, out, the foreground kind of thing. The state of corporate as education is just, it's just wrong. What's happening right now, forcing people to be in-person classes. And I don't know what that would take. I would imagine it would be some form of decorporatization and re-regulation. But yeah, whatever it is, that's what I believe in. And I don't want to work for any institution that would keep me from pointing out what's happening, that's wrong. I feel very fortunate because I'm in a position right now where I have a year left to just now write my disc, because I stepped down from my teaching assistantship because of the state of things. And because I don't think I've talked to you about this. And again, I'm not trying to load trauma on anyone, but my mom passed away from lung cancer last August during the pandemic. So the only reason I can do this right now and step down is because she sued companies for her lung cancer. And we found out a week before she passed away. So I'm one of the most financially stable grad students probably in the country. So I'm trying to make sure that I'm using this position of being able to risk it all and say the things that other people in my position can't say right now, especially, immunocompromised and international students and precarious faculty of any kind. And even now faculty being forced in person by legislators or whatever form, to risk it, because I can see, if you as an institution aren't caring about whether your workers live or die right now, I'm not going to work for you. It's a choice, and it's not everyone's choice, unfortunately. Too many people are coerced into not being able to say anything, and it's disgusting. It's unacceptable.
Yeah. Hold your ground. Go, girl, go. I mean, go, bird, go. That was amazing. Really inspiring. And you said a lot. And first of all, I want to make sure I asked for 90 minutes and we've gone about 90. Can you do another 15 or 20 or?
I could, yeah. Well, and I want also, if I could, I don't mean to be that person, but so I actually, next week, I've been talking with some faculty members about being able to discuss exactly this topic more. And one of the people that I've been talking with is actually trying to gather a clubhouse meeting next week, Tuesday or Thursday evening, in Eastern time zone. So I'm hoping to kind of spread the word about that. If there is anyone watching or will be watching this. Yeah, we're hoping to talk a lot more about that, because
your website is listed on the link here, and they can go there and contact you. That's really good, because I think everything you're saying, people can reach out and talk to you further. But there is a woman who I need you to hook up with, because she played such an important part in teaching McLuhan the Gaia theory. And she was a pioneer in what I was lucky to stumble into in the late 60s in this sort of alternative learning situation. It's called Walden 2 or Summerhill, or all these books that were, and Marshall was writing City as Classroom.
Sure.
But just briefly, her name is Mary Jane Schultz, and she's still living. I'll give you her phone number. You got to talk to her, because I might have told you about it. She invented the word splitteracy. So it's that literacy split the brain.
Oh, okay.
you spell the S with a dollar sign.
Yeah.
And she basically was the advisor to Marshall, Bucky Fuller, Norman Mailer, and Ivan Illich. And
Wow.
she was like raising 6 kids and being a strong woman.
Huh.
And he started Commie High in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is basically community high, which was
Yeah.
like just hang out and grow a garden, play with your dogs and eat popcorn and party. And I mean,
What
the guy
parties?
the guy who invented Skype was a graduate of Commie High, so it's like, wow, the
I mean,
day it
uh,
worked.
she sounds like she helped develop a dream team. So yeah, I would love
but,
to.
but it would be great for you to talk with her because she's an amazing woman and she's still hanging in there. So, what is the most significant difference between women and men, physical aside?
Wow, I love that. I love any question like this because it gives me an opportunity to talk about something that, as a sociologist, is very important to me. I don't cling to many things in sociology, but I do cling to concepts of like the ways in which specialists in fields define certain terms. So, like, before I get into my answer, I want to say when I talk about gender, sociologists refer to gender as man, non-binary, or woman, and there's many other forms of gender that exist.
Yeah.
And then when we're talking about sex, there's biological sex, right? So that's male, intersex, female, and there's so many different types of intersex and non-binary people, or people that identify as having, both genders, or both is a misnomer. I shouldn't even use the word. There's so many types of each. So I wanted to say that first. I think that when it comes to gender, it's ultimately, because it is a spectrum and not something that is a binary, it's always going to differ. Like I particularly use both she and they pronouns because they is both a singular and a multiple type of identifier for people when you don't know their gender. Um, And I think that it's important we talk about the fact that all these things are arbitrary and the social construction of these terms, because people still go around acting as if they're set in stone when the research has been out for 50 or 60 years at this point, at least, about the fact that that's not true. So yeah, I think when it comes down to it, gender, it's always going to be outward presentation, but also maybe the way in which you see yourself internally. And I think that there's so much multiplicity to it and so many aspects to it that, like, I can only speak to my experience. So there are concepts of gender that are associated with masculinity over femininity sometimes, like body hair, for instance, but like realistically speaking, that also brings us into concepts of biological sex, because technically anyone, no matter what sex or gender you identify with, grows body hair, but it's been given the it's been associated with masculinity, so we socialize, or have socialized since like the 40s or something, really not that long ago at all in the grand scheme of human history. And we force anyone that is feminine to shave their body, because why? Because razor companies decided. Like, that's literally, I mean, you can look into it yourself, there's plenty of research about it. So I think that is a good example of just about anything when it comes to gender. I think it's all ultimately arbitrary, and whatever people want to do that makes them feel good and like gives them a reason to like want to wake up and like be excited to like be a human, like they should be able to do it.
Yeah. Well, really well put. How do you find peace of mind?
That's a great, I don't think I'm so new at that. Like I said, my anxiety was like, it controlled me for a lot of my life, and I grappled with it. It was a losing battle for quite some time. And honestly, the weird thing about me, and again, since I'm speaking from a place of extreme privilege now, like I am finally, since the pandemic, in isolation, more relaxed than I've ever been in my life. But it's definitely been something that I've had to make a conscious effort of. Like because of the relationships that I have had in the past with people that have been like unhealthy and codependent in a way where I'm like expecting other people to meet my needs because I was neglecting the fact that I need to be doing that for myself. I'm finally doing that now for the first, which is so ridiculous. Like I said, I'm 31 years old. Like you would think that this is something that I would have done better at the rest of my life, especially with like having gotten through grad school. But I think that like I'm only now like in a healthy routine. I think routine of having things every day that like respect what it is that like, whether it's like exercise or having a skincare routine, which you could problematize, right? Or like having tea that you enjoy and like little things. Like it shouldn't be anything that requires like a lot of like financial buy-in. I don't think that that's sustainable. I think that there's nothing wrong with buying things if you enjoy them, but I don't think that it should be external. That's what I'm trying to get at. I think that it should be something that's like, I mean, the practices, it has to be a lifestyle, right? Where it's like, it's doing something that gives you internal gratification and like respects your body and the life that you want to live.
Well put, Bird. Tell me something good you never had and you never want.
Ooh. I mean, something. I'm grappling with the idea of good.
Yeah, hello. That's the people go, if it's good, I want it. Well, yeah, you want it, it's good. Something good.
People, yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
People love, people in the United States love the idea of having a lot of money.
yeah.
And I think that it's anyone's fault. Which is a weird way to say that. But
Yeah.
we've all been taught that if you have a lot of money that you're going to be happy. And clearly there's, I mean, I was raised on like all these 90s like really surprisingly progressive media contents, like whether it's Rugrats or like any other like early Nickelodeon content that was like calling out the problematic nature of credit cards or like buying too much to like expect that to be happy, and then it turns out you're not happy because you don't have fulfilling relationships, you know, like money isn't buy happiness, etc., etc. And I think that if there's anything I would want to say in regards to this, it's that because of the state of the country and the world right now, like there's so many people that just don't have those basic things because of the like exploitation wages and the lack of just like the lack of choice making that allows people to have basic things, that there's like this like problematic conflation with people that actually just need like a place to live and clean air and food and water and a place to live, instead of pointing out that like basically they just want basic things and they're not hoping for some grand gesture of financial like success, if that makes sense. Like it's very different to say like I want to be a billionaire and like I would like to make more than $20,000 a year, please, with a master's degree, like, or even just without any degrees, like. So yeah.
Well, the answer I get the most,
Yeah.
3 answers. Tell me something good you never had and you never want. Money, fame, and heroin. Those are the 3 most popular answers, which is amazing how many people say it, because money is probably the most dominant answer I get.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you a couple more questions, then we'll bring Clinton on. These are 5 Alan Watts questions. They're really short, so just answer in like 2 to 4 words, just really brief, off the top of your head. Wait, where did it go? Who started it all?
I have no idea.
That's good. Are we going to make it?
I hope so.
Where do we put it?
Where do we put it? What?
Yeah.
What is
Yeah, what is it? You answered a question with a question. You win. Who's cleaning it up?
No one right now.
Is it serious?
Yes, I think it's gravely serious.
Great. You did great. By the way, what I loved a lot about this whole time was your laugh is really
Thank you.
infectious.
I've gotten a lot of reviews about it. People are either like, that's annoying, or they're like, I love that. So thank you.
No, I think Gurdjieff says the best. Laughter is the reconciliation of yes and no.
I love, yeah, wow, that's a really, yeah, I love that a lot. I don't think I've heard
Yeah.
that.
So Thornton Wilder said in 1928, said that art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you a question. I'm not implying that you haven't already answered it. You have in the last 90 minutes. You laid your cards on the table.
Yeah.
But what's it really all about for you?
Art. Yeah, I think it's just basically, for me, like I said, it's anything. I guess we could use the grand it in the way that we just did with these previous questions. It's about, I guess, a belief in knowing that the ideas are most important to me and that ideas have the ability to outlive a person. So like I'm less concerned with anyone remembering my name. Like it would be nice if they did, but it's not the end of the world to me. I'm much more like enamored with the idea of someone remembering the words that I've said and the way that they can make meaning and hopefully, turn this late stage neoliberal capitalist chapter into a new one. Because yeah, I mean, especially with the UN report, I don't know if you saw that, but things are looking very grim since the just destructive tendencies of neoliberalism worldwide.
No, it resonated with what you said about the people from Greenpeace, that told you. It's like, you didn't remember their names. It would have been nice, but you didn't have to. The idea inspired you and lived on.
It literally changed my life. I'm indebted to that person forever, whoever they were.
Yeah. That's great. Okay, Clinton, I know he's been listening. That's the great thing about Clinton. He actually listens.
Intently. That was excellent. Fantastic conversation. First of all, you said you took rhetoric. I'm only just on my own working through classical rhetoric for the modern students.
Oh, nice. Okay,
It's very Ciceronian. I was wondering, did you get into like classical rhetoric in that broad historical sense at all in the graduate course you took?
So yeah, it was a really, really broad, like kind of survey rhetoric course. Like we basically we went. I mean, it would be ill fit, I feel like, to not at least address like a more classical and traditional form of rhetoric. Like I'm interested in like Aristotelian rhetoric. Like I think that there's a lot that it can teach us. I'm specifically really in love with like the ethos, logos, pathos basics. Like I always talk about that in my basic public speaking courses because I think it's just important. And I even brought it into like the basic script writing course that I taught the last couple years. But yeah, I don't know. I've been more fond of like Burkeology, like Burkean concepts of like in groups and out groups. Like Kenneth Burke, there's like
his language is sort of sunk into all of our discourse about this. It's sort of it's an interesting way Kenneth Burke is an excellent example.
He's great.
So much of the language of the 20th century, we use these language and these terms like in-group and out-group without noticing the historicity of like, where did we get these terms? The same with how people throw around the term paradigm, right? Especially Gilbert's pointy-haired boss sort of people who you would never, expect to know who, they would never in a million years know who Thomas Kuhn's was or something like this, right?
Yeah. Well, and other than that, like, I mean, it was basically like, the instructor took us down like a path of like, okay, here's these, and then we went more into like feminist rhetorics too. And like I said, that really exposed me to like learning, and it was more like it was a very existentialist bent, so like Simone de Beauvoir and a little bit of Sartre, but like talking about like, and also like Mary Daly. And I don't know if you've watched, or I don't remember if you attended MEA this year virtually, but I did a talk about it. It was basically a paper I wrote called Towards a Gender in Media Ecology, where I'm trying to pull feminist theories together with media ecology. And like I'm basically just tying together all these parallels of concepts that I'm seeing that basically have, in my mind, speak together. And I'm surprised no one else has pointed them out. So like Simone de Beauvoir talked about this concept of bad faith. And I don't know, it usually Sartre is accredited with the term. And it's interesting because both that phenomena of him credited for it tells us something about academia writ large, but also
Sure.
like the term itself is interesting, right? Because it's this idea of making a move even when you don't make a move. So like the way that I've always kind of remembered it or like visualized it is like, if you remember like being a teen or in early 20s and you're sitting and you're watching a movie next to someone that you are friends with and they might have a crush on you, and you put your hand down on the couch and then they are like trying to muscle up the courage to like try to hold your hand, and let's say they put their hand on top of your hand and you internally are like, uh-oh, like I don't actually have feelings for this person, but I don't want to hurt their feelings, so I'm not going to remove my hand. That is a choice. And that is a bad faith choice, because your choice in not choosing to move your hand is a choice.
It reminds me of some Rush lyrics, actually. If
Yeah,
even if you don't decide, you still have made a choice.
totally. Yeah,
Right.
that's
Yeah.
exactly it. Yeah,
Yeah. No, that's great. I'd like to read your paper. Is it going to be an
totally.
EME?
I submitted it, so we will see. I think
Awesome.
it should be, it might be under review. I don't know. I'm waiting for it to get sent out.
Cool. Remind me of that term you used earlier on in the interview. The idea of not, interioperceptive or something like this. Not
Oh,
immediate
interoception.
interoception.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's exactly that's what T.S. Eliot
Oh, okay.
was talking about in his essay on the metaphysical poets
That
of
makes sense.
of the 16th century. The line in his essays that sums it all up is that the 19th century poets, Tennyson and Browning, they're poets and they think, but they don't feel their thought as immediately as the odor of a rose. So his entire diagnosis of poetry from the 16th
Yeah.
century onward is that poets at large all began to write as though they were a jumble of words divorced from their perception, and they weren't in touch with
Okay.
their emotions immediately anymore. And so that's sort of the launching point for McLuhan's entire investigation is seeing that as a function of the mind-body split. So it's really astute of you to have picked up on that.
I love that. Well, and like I haven't heard that, but it's interesting that you say like, so when I talked about interoception before, like I said, I learned about it because of, I've done research recently, and I actually just published, well, it's like a non-academic publish, so academics probably wouldn't consider it a publication, right? But
I
it's
feel you
about,
there.
right, yeah, it's on the neurodivergent gender diagnosis gap, because I'm arguing that basically the diagnostic criteria is based on young white males, so there's actually a much broader expression, if you will, of autism spectrum cases across the board for people that aren't that. So basically, the reason why I say this is because it's interesting to me. I've seen arguments, and I forget who it's by, but someone argued that McLuhan was on the autism spectrum. And I've seen people say the same about T.S. Eliot. So this makes so much sense to me that like they might have taken that and run with it, because like I think people, because of the stigma, and whether that's, I mean, on any type of like disorder, if you say, or like disability, like we have these stigmas in society on what these things are, but like it's again a fabrication. It doesn't need to be that way. It's just people have different needs. We never know what anyone else is experiencing,
Right.
and like things don't look a certain way, and we have assumed that they do and that they are, and that has failed us because of our own assumptions. So we have a lot to learn. Yeah.
Our own assumptions, exactly. I'm an extremely critical person when it comes to questions like that. And so my gut instinct is, if you want to argue whether or not McLuhan or Eliot was autistic, is entirely on how it is that society, in trying to have conversations about these things, choose to define today what it means to be on the spectrum compared to 10 years ago, compared to when a friend of mine joked the other day that every single boomer defines autism as what it was like in the movie Rain Man.
Sure, yeah.
And so they're totally incapable of considering it in the way the language is used contemporarily, right? So stuff like that, right? So
no, 100%.
And I think that speaks exactly to your point, which I found very important. That I find it interesting that you diagnose communications experts as wanting to alleviate problems in communication, when you up front point out their inevitability. It's entirely true. So that was very cogent. Yeah. Oh, Jerry, we're going to talk for 2 more hours.
Don't
jump in here.
Well, we gotta do what we call McLuhan mashup. So that's where it's both me and Clinton the whole time. So he's very generous, allowing me to do these like interviews one-on-one. And we'll just sign you up for a mashup as soon as you're ready, because this
I'm looking for all the good. Thank you.
As soon as we were all MEA, Palo's conference this year was so much more fun than when I was in it, because it was me and Clinton and you doing
I know,
chat.
it really was.
It was totally Finnegan's Wake, and it reminded me, I was surprised that Clinton didn't bring this up, but when you brought up this bot written script trend, that is this line where Joyce invented that and disguised it as a book. I mean, that is Finnegan's Wake. It really is an amazing.
That's a great point. Yeah. A bot wrote Finnegan's Wake.
Yeah. And it is amazing, because when they asked Joyce, who wrote, how'd you write Finnegan's Wake? He says, I didn't write it. Those people at the coffee house, they're diddling on their cell phones. They wrote it. I mean, he didn't say cell phones, but he did say those people at the cafe, in 20s, they're all flaneurs, psychogeography, diddling on their pads with pens and papers. And he's just like sort of contracting it through the radio airwaves and putting it into print, so that we can read it out loud as a group of people and not do what you normally do. But, in closing, and again, I don't want it to end, but let's end it and then continue and more. You have a quote that sort of reflects my last question always in the interview. And it's called pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will.
Yes.
Now, I researched it a little, and it's amazing because people go hog wild on the net. What does that mean? And who really said it? I mean, I'm sure there's, Romain Rolland, and then the Antonio, he gets the credit usually. But if you want to go into the quote, that's fine. But what gives you, Bird, the most optimism?
Ooh. Honestly, and this may be, again, just due to echo bubbles of the internet right now, but I've never seen more people speaking up about the things that I believe need to be said, like when it comes to injustices, and especially people like Ruha Benjamin and Lisa Nakamura and Mar Hicks, and these people that are talking about these really, and of course our own Dr. Sarah Sharma, who's been talking about the gender and media ecological arguments for years before I came on the scene. People are really talking about the need to historicize and dissect the default settings of technologies, and looking at systems and the ways that we've done things and our need to recover them. And that is I feel so fortunate to be alive right now, because I don't think if I was alive during the witch trials, I would never want to make it. I would never make it. I couldn't imagine, despite all of the tragedy happening, being alive during a time where I would be able to succeed in the way that I may be able to now. So yeah, that gives me optimism for sure.
Yeah. So again, it's going to be so hard to say goodbye here. Thank you so much, Bird. Thank you, Clinton. And I'll send you an email with Mary Jane Schultz's phone number. Call her immediately. Just do it. I try to tell so many people, and her stories with Marshall are amazing. She was in the Bahamas with Marshall and Bucky Fuller.
Yeah.
And Bucky at the first media ecology, like sort of, or one of the first conferences.
Mm-hmm.
And Bucky spoke for 8 hours, and everybody clapped. So he spoke for another 8 hours.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, it sounds like something we could do. So thanks again, Clinton. Thank you so much, Bird. Really appreciate it.
I know, this was great. Thank you both.